of a virtual special at the Kent School District. Directors will be held tonight at October 7th at 5:30 for approximately 2 hours. The purpose of the special meeting is to have a discussion of absence reporting by the board members and to review and work on Kent School District policies. So, good evening. Is everyone here this evening that needs to be here? They're done.
Yes.
Okay, there we go. All righty. So, we're on into opening the meeting, and all right, and we've not, so we're on to a discussion of board members reporting absence. What I wanted to put this on the calendar so we all get on the same page. It seems like have updated the policies, and then there was some differences in opinion on what the word meetings meant, and I asked Karen, Miss Holly wanted to put it on the, then the next meeting when Pam Holly took it on, she had it on the board, then it wasn't on the last time. So I just want to get a consistent policy or protocol, not punitive, not anything, just so we do it consistently the same way. So I'm just wondering if we can't just agree, but well, this is a proposal and you can all disagree totally, believe me, but I'd like to see every absentee listed on the dissent and approval and just approved just like anything else, just so a matter of record. It doesn't state in the policy exactly how we're going to proceed. That's up to us, apparently. I didn't see any policy on how to develop that. I mean, the policy is there, but it doesn't say if we proceed to carry it out. Discussion.
I don't know about anyone else, but you were kind of breaking up a little bit while you were saying that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
So did I hear clearly you wanted just a standing item on the consent agenda, like gift acceptance or anything, and then if there are absences, it stays on the agenda, and if they're not there, it doesn't make it on the agenda? Is that what you said?
Yeah, just to keep it consistent, because we do it one way, then we don't do it the next way. And then, of course, we're going to have people that are going to say, you know, we're not doing it the same. We're, you know, I just don't want any more problems. I want them, and I want to understand that this was my understanding, and I thought in our notes that meetings meant all meetings. And maybe we need to revisit that on the policies.
So I think the only meetings that when minutes are taken and board members are absent, that was my understanding of it. So I don't know if it's different with anyone else, but my understanding is when you have a board meeting and there are minutes taken and it's a meeting that's actually not a work session or not a meeting called at the last minute or whatever that looks like, then that was when it was applied. That's my understanding of it, but I'm not sure if anybody else has that same understanding.
Yes, regular board meetings, regular meeting are every other Wednesday meetings, not work sessions or special meetings. Usually in those, Karen would state if someone was absent or there's no excused or anything, or not absent or not or present.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it's been in the past.
Yeah, and we haven't taken minutes for those meetings either, right? So
no, there are minutes, but it's
for the work sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have to have meetings posted, but it's not there's not a lot of information in it.
I actually looked at all the minutes from our meetings just because I'm a data-driven person, so I like to look at the data. And so there's minutes for all our meetings, even work sessions, but it's the work sessions, obviously the executive sessions only say what the meeting was for. The work sessions only say what the meeting was for. They don't go into what was discussed. Only the regular meetings have that. So Yeah, that's what I noticed when I was looking at all the minutes, because I just wanted to see, how it all fell down and what it looked like. I don't think we videotaped our policy meeting on the 22nd of February when we first talked about it. I know we talked about it not being intended to be punitive, but just as a record keeping measure. Around that time, I looked at other districts, I think, to understand how they did it. And I can't recall which district it was. There is a district where I saw it on their consent agenda, but I can't now. A lot of times I look at Auburn, Federal Way, Renton, Tacoma. Those are the first ones I typically look at. So I think it was one of those. For me personally, I just thought it meant all meetings. I didn't know, and so that was my impression, as it was all meetings. But I could see that you don't want to get in a position where a bunch of meetings are called last minute and then people are absent, and because that would cross the line to punitive, I would think. Especially if you knew someone was out of town or something, you wouldn't want to have that situation. So, and I'll be honest, I'm sorry, I didn't look at the policy to see if it said
it's
that
not
it's not intended it's not intended to be punitive.
But it's not specific. And
yeah, it's not specific.
I honestly do not care how we read it, if it's meetings or all meetings. I just want it to be consistent and fair across the board. And so we have it every meeting, it's done the same way.
Yeah.
I think the question is, though, which ones need to be approved versus which ones are reported. So, for example, let's say, I think that's the conversation, right? The ones that need to be excused in a public board meeting. So I think that's the concern, because I don't know. I mean, I think they all can. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with absences being listed, saying this person was missed this, and it's on the consent agenda. I think that's fair. I don't know. I think the question was, there was something in there about the board voting to approve the absences. And I think that was where some of the confusion came in, because that had not been happening. And so I didn't see the policy included in here. I didn't know we were talking about this. Let me see if I can pull it up, because I think that was where some of the confusion was. It's whether or not the board has to vote to approve the absence, not whether or not it's in the consent agenda or pulled separately. I think that was a concern or question.
It's under 1450, and this is the current one that we approved. I can read it to you if you want to.
I'll pull it up. It's okay, because I'd rather just look at it and have it in front of me. Yeah, so I can see. I'm not going to remember.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Joel.
Directors, I placed the link in the chat.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm reading it too. An excused absence of a board member will be voted in the consent agenda prior to the absence, same date as the absence, or retroactively if there has not been enough notice.
So there was a discussion about what was meant by regular board meetings. And I remember we had that discussion when we first talked about this particular. So we did clarify, even though we didn't explain in the bottom regular board meetings, but it was sort of an understanding. But again, we may need to clarify that for everyone.
Yeah. I personally, I don't mind if my every absence for me has to be excused, but this is a policy that's, we're creating not just for us, but to go forward for other board directors, because none of us are going to be on the board forever, and this won't be looked at hopefully again. So we're kind of on a 6-year cycle. So yeah, it would be something we do in our protocol, I think. And yeah, so and personally, if it's just regular board meetings, I'm fine with that too. I just, honestly, as far as I'm concerned, as long as I'm not redoing work because people weren't at a board meeting, or my colleagues aren't having to review something because I wasn't at a board meeting. I just think as long as we're consistent.
But it is a good point, and I think it's important that if we do miss meetings, we should watch the videos and
Right.
get up to date. If it's an executive session, we should call the district and find out what are the important things that we need to know. Yeah, just saying I wasn't there is not good. So I agree.
And I think also policy 1220 crosses this because that's where they say a majority of the board members may vote to approve the absence. So there's two policies that speak to the absences. So 1220 specifically, because I remember we had discussed this as well. Sorry, my dog is losing his mind. Can you shut him up?
He's protecting you.
Somebody, if not down there. But it says under duties of individual board members, there, paragraph 3 says each member is obligated to attend board meetings regularly. Whenever possible, each director should give advance notice to the president or superintendent of his or her inability to attend the board meeting. Majority of a board may excuse a director's absence from a meeting if requested to do so. The board may declare a member's position vacant after 4 consecutive unexcused absences from regular board meetings. I think that's where we thought that it was actually specific to regular board meetings.
I just wanted to be consistent.
Yeah, so I think that it should be, I mean, my opinion, I think it should, of course, definitely to include the absences. But again, are we talking about which ones we vote to approve or which ones we don't? Is that what we're talking about? Or just?
I just want a process for it to be on the agenda or not on the agenda, and that the executive who actually puts the program together is consistent of how we're going to do it each meeting.
Yeah, if it's on the consent agenda, we're still approving.
Okay, there you go. I think that works to have it on the consent agenda, whoever's absent or whichever meetings were missed.
So if I may interject just briefly to ask a clarifying question. I think the 1000 series is an interesting group because it's a rare group where the board is making decisions about itself, but staff typically write procedure. And so I'd just like a little bit of clarification from the board about the expectations of staff in terms of how this would be operationalized or what you would like to see on the agenda to make sure that we are able to meet your expectations.
Yep, that's what I want.
So I wonder if we could just add a sentence then that says board member absences need to be under the consent agenda for approval. I mean, I don't think it has to be. Are there procedures that go with these two, Jewel?
Unfortunately, WASDA has no model. They have no model procedures.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So yeah.
So that's why I said it's an interesting space for policy work, especially from a staff perspective, because there's not guidance about operation. And so
so I don't know if it needs to be an entire procedure, the set of procedures. We could just add that is, which I thought that's usually what happened, but obviously I don't remember this ever being an issue before. So I mean, Karen, I don't remember this ever being an issue. So,
so if I'm hearing, I'm trying to condense everything because my brain tries to make the patterns. So the idea would be that it would be a standing consent agenda item, but within 24 hours before the meeting, if there were no known absences, it would either say no known absence. It could just be a standing item that said no known absence, or like the standing item on the agenda, the gift acceptance. I was looking for the word acceptance. You know how that gets pulled if there are no or it says no gifts or whatever. Is that what you're talking about? Is that what we're talking about or agreeing to here?
I think it makes sense.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay. So is somebody taking notes tonight?
So I want to be clear, just what
What did we just agree to?
What did we just decide?
Right.
Because
Right.
we've had this conversation
Right.
multiple times. I think
Thank
one
you.
overarching challenge is the definition of a meeting. So have we defined that? And what type of meeting are we holding ourselves accountable? I think I heard it. I want to make sure I'm clear and Karen is clear going forward.
I heard regular board meeting. Is that correct?
That's what I heard.
Okay. And yet, step 2
Check.
is
Yes. Very good.
what are we going to do? What are we going to do now that we have agreed upon that for a procedure that is consistent?
So what I heard is that on the consent agenda, there would be individuals who were, let's say, individual board members who were absent. Their names would be listed. And there would be a statement that would suggest these absences are excused, for example. Is that what I heard, or is that what you were?
I think when we vote
Wanting
to
to hear.
approve it, that would excuse those absences, right?
Mhm.
So are we going to have excused after it, or are we going to vote to approve it?
That was the question. That was the second question I was asking, because they're two different things,
Right.
right? Right. So
So let's keep going. Okay.
If
So
not approving it, wouldn't it go on the informational instead of the consent agenda?
if
I guess
if it's
I'm
so if it's
questioning
needed,
it's the same
right?
thing as the
It
meeting
wouldn't go on.
minutes.
Yeah, it wouldn't go on obviously if it wasn't needed, if no one was
Right.
absent. I guess that's
Right. Yeah.
right.
You know,
That's clear.
the meeting minutes are approved, and
Yeah.
in it says,
is listed
you
the
know,
absence,
who's
right? The absences are listed.
Mhm.
It's not present and who's present. So, and we're approving the minutes. So.
Yes.
Right. That's true.
Okay.
That brings up an interesting point. Thank you, Director Van Dossen. I didn't even realize that that would be approved in doing so.
Yeah.
Yeah, whenever we approve the minutes, it's always listed in the minutes who's absent and who's not.
I mean, I read them, but I never thought about that.
That's the simplification of it, right?
So we probably don't need to do it twice then.
It
Correct.
just doesn't say excuse, not excuse.
Right. It just says who was there and who wasn't.
So we're back to square one. Do we need to list it, or have we already got it listed in the board meeting minutes?
That's why I'm questioning why we would do that. It's already in the minutes. We're taking a vote.
Yes.
Right.
Somebody wants to bring it up.
They
You
can
know, we're
pull the
not
agenda.
saying, and
Yeah.
we're not saying excused, unexcused for non-regular board meetings. But for regular board meetings, how do we want to handle that? I mean, that's going to be in the minutes too.
Because this became a big issue when I wasn't doing it correctly, talking about it from the board, so I wanted it done right.
Well, I agree. And I think before everybody came on the board, it was an issue when Dr. Watts and Vice President Daniels were out for that one meeting. So I think it started then. Who should be at these meetings and how do we deal with it when they're absent? So for regular board meetings, they're also on the minutes and it does say excused or unexcused. Do we want to do anything else beyond that? I guess would be my question.
I don't know that we do.
Then, I mean, we have a process right now.
Mhm.
So I don't see how we're changing it.
I think the challenge is that it's just not,
It's not
Again,
really
we've never-
transparent. Yeah. though.
well, but we've never, so like, I remember, so when we had board meetings and someone wasn't there, it would be stated that, so like when Maya was president, she would state Director Daniels is absent from this meeting and move on. So it wasn't as though, and it was listed in the minutes. So it wasn't as though there was an excusal or approval that was happening. It was just stated. And when we approved the minutes, we approved the absence, but we didn't have a vote to excuse or to not excuse anyone.
Mhm.
So we never did that. So I think the only issue honestly came up when you were concerned, Leslie, about us missing a meeting that was a meeting that was called. It wasn't a board meeting, it was a meeting that was called
last minute.
prior to the changing of the board duties. And so that was
No,
when you
no,
brought it up
I
as a
was,
concern.
no, it came up when we had, you wanted to bring up Director Bowen's absences and all that.
No, came up before that when you brought up my absence.
That was, yeah, after the fact, because we passed the policy and I didn't even think it was in the minutes, so we wouldn't even had to put any of it on there. So I wouldn't understand why you had the reasoning with why we had to bring up Director Bowen's absences if it was just a matter of approving minutes, if you recall.
Because you brought it up when I was absent, and
No,
we've had this conversation, and so you wanted to have a discussion about it when I was absent. And
because
when
Director
right.
Bencher asked me to put that on the agenda.
I'm just saying it was brought up prior.
Just for clarification, as I recall, we did discuss this. There's two different things. This policy, we did discuss, should we be taking a vote at a board meeting to approve the absence regarding this policy? That's one thing. And that was also, we passed a bunch of policies in May 13th and maybe after.
We approved it, right?
Yeah, we approved policies. So then, because we had that, and we also approved the adding the comment at the beginning of the meeting, and those things didn't happen. So I will say that I brought it up that, you know, we had changed some policies and that things that I thought we had talked about weren't happening. That's one issue. Then going back to December 19th, me personally, I understand that a board director misses meetings. My comments about that were only because the superintendent missed the meeting. We've all, except for Leslie, who seems to have perfect attendance, we've all had to miss meetings for various reasons. But the reason I was bringing it up is because, you know, state law says the superintendent attends all meetings. So it was only in regards to Dr. Watts. It was not in regards to Vice President Daniels in 12/19. And then, as I recall, at our meeting on the 22nd, we talked about, you know, how you actually approve the meetings, approve absences. So
in February, right?
February. I'm sorry, February.
Correct. Right. It was. Yeah.
And so we talked about, would that be something that should be on the consent agenda? Like I've seen, and like I said, I can't remember now. I look at so many different districts board docs. They all start to blur. So we had that discussion. So again, I think I personally too, I'm looking to have just clarity on process and procedure. And, you know, I'm glad we're having this discussion because it helps me. And I think all of us just having that clarity to know what to expect, to know what's going on. And I think early on too, in those early days, I know I was struggling with understanding all the processes and procedures. And, you know, our last meeting too, we had that discussion on how to get something on the agenda because I obviously didn't even understand that process and procedure. And, you know, everyone has different personality types and I'm a very process procedure. I want to follow the rules. I want to make sure I'm supporting my colleagues by following the rules and doing best for our kids by following the rules. But if they're not spelled out or I don't understand them or they're not agreed upon, then, you know, it's hard, you know, something that I think we've approved and then it doesn't happen. It gets difficult for me. So.
Well, and I want to say too that I think it's great to see that in the minutes and everything, but every board or commission that I've sat on has always had a procedure beyond the minutes for listing those kind of things. And perhaps that's what I was looking for. And that's been my past and in the organization I've been. I just think we're here now. What are we going to do now? And we'll go forward.
Well, Joel just put something in the chat about the RCW around this.
So thank you, Director Bowen. I am not a lawyer and I wasn't going to interject, but I don't want to belabor this conversation. But it appears that, so when I did look at the WASDA model policy in our links, there is an RCW that does kind of muddy this discussion just a little bit as you all are having it. In terms of, because the RCW reads, and I don't mean to insult anyone by reading to you, but it says that in absence of any board member from 4 consecutive regular meetings of the board, unless on account of sickness or authorized by resolution of the board, shall be sufficient cause for the remaining board members of the board to declare by resolution that such board member's position is vacated. Now, I know we're not talking about vacating a position or trying to remove someone from the board. However, there's this space where it talks about giving reasons why an absence is occurring and making exceptions for different types of absences. So I just wanted that to be noted and want you all aware of that. So as you're having the discussion about the absence piece, there is RCW that does kind of get into the type of absence and what it means.
Well, and our policy says the exact same thing, only it says may. It doesn't say will, it says may, you know, at the end.
Yeah, we did have a discussion on that. And again, this is about absences from 4 consecutive regular meetings. And WASDA does define regular meetings as our traditional board meetings and not special meetings or work sessions.
Yeah.
So that should be clear.
Yeah,
I
'cause
think
we had,
it's clear. I think we can actually agree that it's regular meetings. Now, how do we deal with it? Am I correct?
Yeah, I do have a concern, and I feel like I know personally I missed one meeting, and that was because it was called last minute. And so I have a concern with those, you know, kinds of meetings where we can't prepare for to be there. And so that's where I have difficulty with the excuse, non-excuse. I just want to state that. But other than I'm perfectly fine with what we have. Although you're right, Vice President Daniels, it does kind of conflict or is not clear, the 2 policies we talked about. So we do need to clean that up.
Yeah.
Maybe merge it to one. Not really clear if WASDA has the same 2 policies.
so
That is confusing.
yeah, and like I said before, I'm fine with just regular meetings. It makes sense, and you don't want to get in. And again, if we're creating these policies for a few years, I wouldn't want a future board members to get in a position where maybe somebody was calling meetings, special meetings that they knew people couldn't attend to try and whatever. So I'm also fine with regular meetings. I just want to clarify what Dr. Harmon brought up. So with the RCW, are you suggesting that we should take the extra step of approving any absences to regular meetings to make sure we're falling within the law?
So I am not going to pretend that I can give legal advice on this and it be valid.
I was going to say,
Right. I would defer that to Curtis or actually Curtis as board attorney. But I would say that since you're having the discussion, at least getting consensus on where you stand may help Curtis then align with the policy language that should be there. And I just don't want you all to come to a consensus without having that consideration. And so it appears that at least calling out illness seems to be aligned very clearly and explicitly with the RCW.
And a lot of times too, when you talk about like FMLA and things like that, law would not only your own illness, but the illness of an immediate family member, like a child, parent, someone you were a guardian to, that typically it's not just yourself. It would be caring for an immediate family member.
Well, I mean, how does work related? I mean, that's an important thing too, It's not listed on there.
That's true.
I think that's a consideration
Right.
I mean, I'd feel comfortable with as it is maybe just adding that. I don't know.
I think I don't think our policy is clear as law.
But are we going to miss 4 consecutive? I mean, that's the operative word for me. The 4 consecutive regular meetings of the board.
That's true. That would
be
that would be
2 months. That would be 2 months. That would, in some instances, that'd be 2, maybe 3 months. And I remember also on the 22nd of February, we talked about, the no call, no show. It's like, that would be an extreme situation if hopefully if someone was a no call, no show, that we would know fairly soon that they were safe and all that.
Mhm.
But I think that was where our conversation went on the 22nd is it's basically to protect our community and constituents, that if their district representative was a no call, no show to 4 consecutive meetings in that span of time, then it would be time to take action.
Well, then after that conversation, I personally think that we're okay with the policy as it is. I just want to know how we're going to work with it from here going on. I hear you saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we will use regular board meetings, that second of all, that the policy presently really covers most of it for unexcused absence, so we don't really have to change the policy or talk to our lawyer, that we've got it covered. But now I want to know, and if I'm incorrect, that everybody agrees on that, how we are going to deal with this on our agenda.
Well, Vice President Daniels said that not last year, but when Director Vendagosalam was the board president, she would call out at the board meeting that so-and-so was absent. I mean, that seems to be, very simple.
It sounds simple, but in actuality, to put that on the agenda, and a lot of the times I'm not aware of that, so the person doing the agenda actually needs to put it on there.
No, it wasn't on the agenda that somebody's going to be absent. Just mention it right before the board meeting, starts at the dais.
Part of the protocol is yeah.
And you are notified when people are absent. They typically would notify the president and Ms. Howley and Dr. Watts.
Well, I haven't been in the past, but it should be. Yeah, I agree. But it doesn't happen all the time. It hasn't happened.
Then it would be an unexcused absence.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. But let's say you get in a car accident and you can't call.
Well, then nobody would know. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, that's different. If somebody's taking the time to let somebody know, and we can just, I guess we can just set the expectation here. If we're absent, we need to make sure, which I didn't realize was another issue, let the president and Ms. Howley and Dr. Watts know. That's always been the protocol.
Yeah, there was an issue. There was a time when someone didn't call in. I remember that. And I think that time we should have said so-and-so is absent. We're not quite sure what the reason. I don't know if we need to get into details, but we can just say so-and-so is absent,
Well, we did. Yeah. So there is a list of, it was unexcused. So we do have a list of absences that were not excused. We do. Ms. Howley has that record, I believe.
So here's a suggestion and a thought. If we place that on the next meeting so that we have enough time to monitor and determine who was absent, if someone was absent, and place that information on the next meeting's consent agenda.
Yeah.
And that would solve. And certainly I could work with Karen to make sure, certainly working with President Hamada to make sure, if we're talking about communication needs to happen between board president, including superintendent and executive assistant, then we should be able to solve this problem that way.
Yeah. And only regular meetings would be.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do I hear you saying, Dr. Watts, that from going forward, myself or the board president, the superintendent, and the executive assistant will do what?
Should be included on the email from said board
or phone call,
board member or community, whatever format of communication.
Yeah, thinking about emergency situations.
Right.
And will that be verbalized from the dais, or will that be written?
So communicating that absence. So assume that absence is communicated, suggesting that information, so those individuals or an individual board member who is absent, their name would go on the next regular meeting's consent agenda. And that way, two things. One, we'd have record of that. And two, board president would be able to state that in open meeting,
Okay.
and everyone would be on the
And
the
that's
same
what I'm
page.
looking for. That's exactly what I'm looking for. Consistency, fairness that we've all agreed upon. Thank
Okay.
you.
But
So
just clarity, I have a, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I have a clarifying. So are you saying it would not be mentioned until the next meeting? Because I do think if there's a board member not on the dais, it needs to be acknowledged in that meeting that the
Yeah.
board member is not on the dais. Now, the
Absolutely.
reason could be later, but I'm just saying, I think it needs to be said if there's a board member not at the current meeting.
Yes, and I said that earlier. I didn't restate that, so thank
Oh,
you for
okay.
that
I didn't hear
clarification.
that.
That would
Okay,
be in the
yeah.
protocol. That would be in the protocol. of
Right, that is in the
meeting.
protocol, right,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, so the steps, I wrote them down. So maybe these are the steps. One, the potentially absent board director would contact Dr. Watts, board president, Ms. Howley. 2, that would be verbalized from the dais. 3, that person's name would be on the next regular meeting's consent agenda for approval.
In the minutes, right? Or
In the
is it
minute,
now in the minutes?
and it would also be in the minutes.
Correct.
So that's 4.
Are we putting it, so did we decide we're gonna
Wait.
put it as, I thought we were just gonna approve the minutes with the absence listed.
Oh,
Okay.
Oh, so
Okay.
the minutes
good.
are in the consent agenda.
Right, they're
Right.
already there with the absence listed.
So there's no 4, there's only 3. So-
Okay. Okay. So name on next regular meeting consent agenda in the minutes.
Right. Which they
And-
always are.
okay. And is this considered protocol then?
It's a 3-step
Yes.
process.
It's a protocol.
Procedure or
I need a label on this. What are we going to call it? Business protocol, business norms, agenda
Board.
protocol, board protocol?
Well, like I said, we could add something. We could add those steps to our policy. I mean, so it doesn't, or we could
Okay.
do it in protocol. I mean, I don't know that we need to establish those as a procedure.
It
So
could be our
is
meeting
this,
hour.
are we
Sorry.
simplifying? I guess that would be the question too. Are we
I want
simplifying?
to simplify, but tell me how it's going to be simplified. Sorry.
So far, I feel like we haven't done anything different. Still trying to find what we're doing different, but okay, we're
Consistency.
clarifying. Okay, got it.
I think we're
Consistent,
clarifying, right?
Got it.
but it's consistency.
A consistent process.
Okay,
So perhaps put those steps in our board protocol. When we start finishing our board protocol, let's just put those steps in there.
I love it. Thank you. Does everybody else like it?
I think it's a fabulous idea.
I think you're all fabulous. Now we can go home.
All right.
It's
If only.
it's the linear people that like the step-by-step process. And
that's all right.
It's okay, yeah.
Okay, I
Thank you.
think we're actually ready to move on. And we're now on to, am I correct? We have finished this. Don't want to leave anybody's thoughts out. Okay. We're now on to policy review and discussion. And this pretty much is going to be led, I believe, by Dr. Harmon, correct?
That's correct.
Steps you had in order that you wanted to go through. And thank you for being here, Dr. Harmon.
Absolutely.
Where are you going?
Mhm.
Dr. Harmon, thank you. The floor is yours.
There
So
you
good
are.
evening, President Habana, members of the board, Dr. Watts, Ms. Howley. It's a pleasure and it is policy party time. I included in the chat and I sent you all an email with the link to the presentation. I'll be sharing my screen, but I know that sometimes you want to read along. So all of the links are active in the presentation. If you want to open up specific policies and see other language or possibly see a board member's comments, you can do that as we go through. So I'm going to start with sharing my screen, and I will remind you that when I share my screen, I cannot see your faces. So please interject whenever you need to. So we know where we are and we know what date it is. This evening, we're going to start with trying to help me and staff confirm our policy schedule. And then we're going to get right into the update work. So in my board updates and in communication with the board, I've shared some tentative dates based on what we heard on the September 12th policy meeting. And I proposed, because what we discussed at that time, and I think what you all agreed to as a board thus far, was possibly using off Wednesdays or an occasional Saturday or an occasional Thursday to engage in policy work session work. And so based on that, I tried to identify a cadence that would allow us to have a discussion of policy and apply the information from Curtis about the first reading versus second reading and action on policy. So moving forward, first readings and discussion happen during a work session. Second reading and approval or adoption will happen in a regular meeting. And so this schedule reflects that. So what the policy decisions and actions that are made tonight will reflect on the October 28th regular meeting as a second reading and adoption action. And then I'm proposing a meeting in November. And because November typically only has one board meeting, the regular meeting action would take place at the single board meeting in December, which is December 9th. And then we would engage in possibly a late January or early February work session opportunity with the regular meeting action happening on February 10th. Again, proposed a tentative work session for March with regular meeting action in April, and then possibly a May or June, depending on where we are with the needs of our work session timeframe with fiscal year or school year updates for 2021-2022 school year. That's hard to believe. We're already having conversations thinking about that. But so I just wanted to talk about that because it wasn't really clear. I know that the board is committed to policy work. They've committed to adding some work sessions to do that. And just wanted your thoughts on some of these tentative work session dates. And so you don't have to commit right now to this, but I just want some agreement that I would engage Ms. Howley and Dr. Watts in kind of the consideration of this. And I tried to balance not too many extra Wednesdays. There's, I think, a Thursday or a Saturday there as well, but it's not much in the way of getting into weekends or kind of non-Wednesday time.
I think we discussed at our last meeting that it was very important to have consideration for our staff. And I just, if these are all probably worked around your schedule, Dr. Harmon, I'm for adopting all of them.
So it's a balance of what would work for staff and preparation and the commitments of the board and honoring the board schedule as well. So we are all humans in this, and but it does allow you to have a policy conversation and take an action every month, just about.
I like
we
it.
recognize it is a priority. We want to recognize that we also in previous conversation recognize that, as we've mentioned, we do have lives and Saturdays. We heard loudly, clearly that we want to minimize that time. So not saying that this work is not important, but I want to stress what Dr. Harmon has placed before us. Let's be mindful of how we're using our time during this policy schedule.
A subtle hint of the dates that are Saturdays is where you'll see the 9 to noon.
Yeah.
Right.
And obviously the 5:30 to 7:30s are the weekday opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not available on Thursdays. And also just the 14th, I'm out of town. But I'm not available on Thursdays.
Yeah. And I don't have my big wall calendar with the whole family on it in front of me right this second, but certainly the cadence of a work session each month and then just having action in regular meetings is desirable so we can get the work done, I think. So without knowing my exact schedule, personally, yeah, I think, but I would, if there are dates, can this be sent to us in doodle poll so we can look at our schedules?
Absolutely. So this is kind of the preview of kind of that next step in the process. And what I'm hearing as well is that Thursdays are more than likely not an option for the full attendance of the board. And I think with policy work, you all have discussed the importance of having not just the majority of the board present, but all of the board members present. So I'll take a look at this and remove any Thursdays from the calendar. And then I'll make sure that I get this to Ms. Howley and Dr. Watts so that you all can go through the doodle poll process. But I wanted you to kind of understand why you were seeing it the way you were seeing it and what the dates represent. And so they just represent time for kind of action early in the month. And then it gives an expectation of when the regular meeting action would take place based on that.
Right. Yeah, that's very helpful.
Yeah.
And I really like the cadence. I really do. I do. So if you could kindly take care of that from that point on, I think the board would really appreciate that, Dr. Harmon.
Okay. So that takes us through our policy schedule conversation, and we're going to move right into updates. And so I communicated with the board earlier this week, or no, I believe last week, with a list of policies for review. Some the board have you all divided up and reviewed. Some you expressed interest in our previous policy work session. And then 2 are related to WASDA alerts and kind of legal updates, and we'll talk about those. But we're going to start with 4312, which I believe was an interest of the board. Actually, I may ask board permission to change the order of this just slightly. WASDA Model Policy 3424 is new, and it's related to opioid-related overdose reversal. And Lindy and Randy are joining us to speak to that and answer any of your questions. And I just want to honor their time and attendance by asking if I could make that first, and then we'll move into 4312 and the rest of it.
Sure.
Yep. Okay. Sure. So Randy, Lindy, if you can hear me, I will click on the versions of the policy and you guys can talk about whatever you'd like, or would you prefer that I stop sharing my screen?
No, you can click on that and then we'll just answer any questions that people have around.
Okay. And I believe I have to reshare the actual document, so give me just 1 second.
I thought that was my computer doing it.
I'm gonna make the font a little bit bigger. And it's all in red because it's new. And I'll stop talking and mute myself and you can take it away, Randy.
Okay, so basically a law was passed by the legislature really around trying to get this very life-saving medication into the hands of individuals that might need them. As you know, that many of our police officers carry this with them and are able to administer it quickly after an overdose, and has saved many lives. And so there was a law that was passed that basically stated that all high schools over a certain capacity should stock this, and that school boards should adopt the policy, WASDA's model policy on how to use that. And so we are hoping to comply with the law. We already have the drugs in our possession, the medications in our possession, and already when students return, if we have a policy in place to administer those medications.
Did I see that we have a WASDA, this is the WASDA model policy, and we have a Kent policy too. Did you make any changes to the Kent policy or did you, after reviewing this, say that the WASDA model policy as written is appropriate and applicable?
Yes. Yeah, we are going with WASDA's model policy.
So I have a question. So is this going to require parental approval? So for example, because I'm assuming it's Narcan that they're using, is it going to require parental approval? Are parents going to be notified that this is something that has to happen? Oh, it's not.
The
Okay.
actual medication and the way the policy is written, I don't believe requires parental approval because
Okay.
it's an emergency medication. Quite frankly, you could go in and purchase this at the pharmacy yourself. So I don't think it requires it. We have a standing doctor order for the medication for the school to use.
So is it different than like I think about an EpiPen, right? And that does that require parental permission? So I'm just curious. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yes. An EpiPen does require parental
And it's an
permission.
emergency. Okay.
For emergencies, and there's actually actions and guides around it, as would this policy have procedures and everything and guidelines around it. Although the difference is this particular policy does not require any pre-approval because it is a life-saving medication that we have to stock. We do not have to stock epinephrine.
Got it. But so I guess.
And this is not a narcotic. It reverses the opioid. So there is no side effect. If you used it and it didn't need to be used, it has no ill effects.
So I guess my question is, are parents going to be notified that this is happening now? And would they be notified if their child got a dose of this?
They would be notified because we call 911 unless the child were over 18. So 911 is going to be called, which is an automatic, got to get a hold of the parent, and the parent needs to respond. So yes, they would be notified of that. I don't see any reason we couldn't put something of this effect into our annual notices type.
Yeah. Okay. That's my question. Thank you. Okay.
I don't believe there's anything in the policy that says we have to do that, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
Well, as a parent, I would appreciate it. I'm sure most parents would.
Yeah.
So, I want to know. I mean, it's a good thing. I'm just saying, I think, yeah.
I think it is. I agree, Vice President Daniels. It's important that parents know that we have this available. And, it's just even, if it could even be, just even on our website as an update or something like that, just to say we're providing this now, or we have it on site to protect our students, I
have two questions. The first one is there a certain protocol that the school will follow in recognizing a student that is having an opioid overdose? And then my second question is let's say that this happens and it is used on a student. What happens then? I'm just concerned about the student having negative ramifications from this. I would hope that we would treat this as, not something to be punished, but something to, help them heal over and not have any punitive repercussions to that. I mean, it's a disease, not, an addiction, or an addiction is a disease, not, that's what I wanted to say.
So, Lindy, do you want to answer the first question, then I can address the second question maybe? So.
Okay. All right. Your first question is, sorry.
It's okay.
I got caught up on the second question. I apologize.
All right. So my first question was, is there a certain protocol that the staff follow to recognize and respond to a situation where a student would be having an opioid overdose?
Yes, there is. And actually there would be a whole training and procedure involved in identifying, yes, is this a potential narcotic overdose or opioid overdose, and we would then use the medication. But there is a procedure and a training that the school nurses will train, and we have a kind of identified specific staff like security guards and administrators. This is strictly for the high schools, which we included KPA and iGrad in, so we have obtained it for all those, but there is a protocol that they would be going through, and we actually have a Safe Schools presentation on it also.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And as far as the other question around the discipline issue is, we do encounter kids that are heavily under the influence of drugs and alcohol at times at school. that need medical attention, not just this procedure here. You know, technically they are violating school policy at the time by being under the influence of, you know, a drug. It is not our primary concern when first addressing this. We address it first as a medical emergency. I can't say that discipline would not take place in a scenario like this. However, I do want to emphasize that in the last number of years, we have drastically changed the you know, the consequences for being under the influence for drugs and alcohol, and in some cases it does not even result in a suspension if it's a first offense. And so you know, we always look at it as this is an illness first, and there's always the you know, stipulations of, if you agree to an assessment and, you know, that is paid for by the district, then, you know, and following that treatment plan, that, you know, your consequences will be, you know, greatly reduced even more. So our main effort in there is not to suspend kids out for long periods of time, is to get them the help that they need.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you just share why it wasn't in middle schools?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike.
I actually can't tell you because that's the law came out that said high schools.
High schools? Do
And
they not know middle school statistics?
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not disagreeing with you,
Wow, okay.
but the policy came out and addressed high schools, and I don't know what statistics they were using or what information they had when they developed the law, then passed the law, but it just says high schools.
Do we use this, or could we use this in the middle schools without a law?
You can. You do not. Yes, you can use it. We do not need further law or anything. We can actually put it into middle schools if we choose.
But at present, we're not planning to do that, or?
At present, we weren't planning to do that. We were planning to get it into the high schools and get into compliance with the law.
So to this discussion, it is not unheard of, though, for a middle school student to require this.
Correct.
So wouldn't, you know, since as the board, we have the option to, you know, adapt policy for our own, you know, adapt WASDA model policy as long as we're following the law. So we as a board could choose to add middle schools, understanding that there would be an additional cost for the drug, the medication, and training, etc.
Additional costs would be around, because we do have, well, I'd have to check the high school medication, the Narcan. There is a company, Adapt Pharma, that has worked with high schools and provides actually the Narcan free. So the only thing we've had to purchase is the cabinet, for lack of a better term, that it would be housed in. And so that would be our cost, because I believe they would also cover the middle school, but I would have to check into that to be absolutely sure. And so we would be looking at that cost. And then again, yes, the training and getting them developed, you know, they're on board with procedures.
And the city of Covington received a large dosage, I believe, gifts from Multicare and some other drug. I don't think the cost of the medication, I think we could find some foundations or gifts on that. It would be the training. And I also, with all the other directors, think that, yeah, it happens in our middle schools. So being proactive and caring about our students, if we could add that, I'm totally in favor of that. Unfortunately, they start young.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, so don't some of our nurses split schools, right? We don't have dedicated nurses at schools. They do split schools, right?
That is
So
correct.
they would be trained. So some of them, I would think, do they cross between the high school and the middle school?
Yes, we do.
So, okay. So I'm just wondering about, when you're talking about training, I'm thinking some of them probably would be there as a resource. So I was just thinking about so it's not really training everybody per se, but maybe just a few specific administrators at each middle school to accommodate.
Correct.
The nurses would all be trained in it. Okay. Thank you.
So could we add the middle schools to our policy of WASDA's or WASDA's policy?
I actually don't believe we'd have to look through it, but I don't believe we actually have to add that because I think that's an option. The law says we have to do it in middle schools, but we can offer it in other, if I'm not mistaken.
Linda, you said middle schools. Did you mean high schools?
I mean, it's required in high schools. Yes, correct. But I think we can
Okay.
offer it in middle school. And I think it actually says it when you read out the whole policy.
Okay.
And I think in line with what our board is suggesting, I certainly understand and appreciate knowing that high school behaviors have typically now trickled down to middle school behaviors. And we are also seeing in some cases typical middle school behaviors trickling down to elementary school.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
The reality is, I think it would be important for us in as much time as we need to take, but not forever, but to take a look closely at what our data say. And it'd be interesting to see how many or to what degree this is currently impacting our middle school population, to see to what extent we would need to make any additional or plan for additional changes or adjustments. Brandy, your
and
thoughts
I
on
will say that I don't proclaim to be an expert on this,
Right.
but my understanding is that middle school we do not see a lot of opioid use in middle school, just because middle school is where they start experimenting, and that's where they end up, the alcohol and marijuana, and it is the overdose opioid use is much more common among high school and just leaving high school age young adults. And so that is what I've heard from some of our groups, but doesn't mean that some of our middle school kids are not engaging in that behavior. And so I can see an argument.
To be clear, we're not restricting in which schools we would use this. We are just saying that we will identify one member of each high school's personnel, but we're not really restricting, right? Am I clear? Am I right on that?
Restricting it to one? You mean that No,
we're not restricting which school. We can use this, whether it's middle school, elementary, whatever, but we're just saying that we'll identify one member of each high school's personnel to become a designated responder, correct? Or no?
Well, there will be, the reversal drugs will be in each of the high schools.
Right.
And yeah.
And we would want to train more than one. So yes, there would be at least one identified, and we would be looking at, like I said, in a high school, training all the administrators, the security staff.
But what I'm saying is it's not restricted to just high school. We can't, that's where we're have the training right now, but it could be used in middle schools and elementary, right?
I believe so. I'm going to pull up my copy of this.
It specifically calls out high school, but it doesn't necessarily say, because it also talks about playgrounds. So I wonder during field trips, those types of things. So I think that it does call out high school multiple times, but I don't think it's limiting it to high school.
exclude? Yeah.
Yeah, but I really would encourage us to consider the middle schools, not necessarily elementary. One is too many, regardless of, you know what I'm saying? I know it may not be, but I do. I'm familiar with a middle schooler who overdosed and had this situation. And so I think one is too many. So it's just being prepared, right? I think it's just being prepared.
Yep. And I'm assuming this is going to have, the board approves the policy, but I'm assuming there's also going to be procedure written around this, and
So yes, there is procedure, and we'll share the proposed WASDA model procedure. Randy and Lindy have looked at that as well. I just didn't want us to take the time tonight to get into the weeds of procedure when particularly our policy time, but you will see that because it will come to you in an informational agenda item as well.
Right. Yeah. And no, it's not the board's purview is the policy. So just, in this instance, again, because these are policies we're hopefully going to have in perpetuity, if middle school is important, I would suggest, and it sounds like it's important to all the board, I would suggest just adding that language for clarity so that down the line, if all of the 5 of us are not here, that down the line it's understood the intent of the board is to include middle schools.
Yeah. Could it say
So-
secondary instead? That encompasses middle and high school,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So could we
right.
say secondary schools in
That's
our
a good
particular
idea.
policy?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, because our only purview is the policy. So yes, that would be a great solution to just change every time it says high school to change it to secondary school. And then the intent of the board, this board would be clear, for however long this policy exists.
So do I hear everybody agreeing to that? And then we can move on to the next one.
Yes.
Okay.
So
Thank
I
you.
believe I hear consensus. And so Randy and Lindy, we can work together on just making that small change to expand this to middle school in operation, but just changing the language to say secondary.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you for
Lindy.
being here tonight.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
All right, we'll see you soon.
Okay. I'm going to go back to sharing my
Share? All
screen.
right, thank you.
There we are. So we just covered policy 3424. I'm going to go back to a continuing conversation from our previous September 12th meeting. The board was engaged in a conversation around 4312. And before we get too far into the details of that, and we'll share a couple of things and links. So Director Bettinger and Bangadaslam are welcome to share their comments. So they were on their slate to review. That this is actually technically misnumbered per WASDA model policy. So whatever changes that we make, I would recommend that we align it with the WASDA model numbering, and it be a renumbering as well as an update of the policy, because the correct number would be 4220. And so I'll open the floor, and please let me know which comments or policy you'd like to see. But I'll start with the original comments from Directors Bettinger and Bangadaslam. So WASDA's model is very, very short. Here's their language, that's it. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to it. Some of the meat happens in procedure, and then I'll open the floor, but I also included the link with some research that Director Bettinger shared with me so that you all can review that as well.
This is similar to
And then and then I'll let you speak to that, Director Bettinger,
Yeah.
but I did include it
Yeah.
as a link so they can see it. So
Yeah, this is because it's an expansion of what I researched, but in June when we were working on it, and I just added some things for clarity. But yeah, this is what we talked about.
Also, I know it's not within our purview, but we did have a lot of suggested language in the procedures.
Yeah.
Because I think that was one of the big concerns during our discussion, that process itself.
Yeah. And like Tacoma has a great form, and then I couldn't find it again, but Tacoma has a great form that to go with the language at the top of this, and I didn't include the form because I couldn't find it again, but they have a great form where it's like You know, it kind of is a checklist. Did you talk to the teacher? Did you talk to this person? Did you like that? I did where you could link to everything. I made a table of contents for you.
It makes it really easy when you all are having this conversation for me to go to what you're referencing so others can see it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So this is Tacoma's. I'm sorry if I'm
Yeah.
scrolling.
Yeah. Tacoma, in
A little
Tacoma, so it scrolls, so they have, they scroll down. Most districts in the, they're following a lot of the WASDA model procedure. And this is the decision of the board shall be final, you know, adding that. But to our last conversation, you know, we added language in the policy as well. You know, Director Vengadaslam and I added to the policy language in the policy as well. But I can, you know, Dr. Harmon too, you can send this to the whole board so they can see them all if they want. But this is the meat of our discussion is right here, which you see on the screen.
Well, because we're having this in an open public meeting, what I did was I saved the link myself and shared my link in the PowerPoint. And so if they click the link that says, I think it says Director Bettinger's research, additional information, they will see the entire piece and it'll be there for anyone who happens to want to look at the presentation or click the link.
Thank you.
So it's there for all to see.
Yeah.
So
this part looks good to me.
Yeah. And this is the only thing that's under our purview.
Right. Yeah, this looks good. I mean, I think it looks good.
Yeah. And so whoever ends up,
Sweet.
whoever ends up writing the procedure, again, Tacoma School District seemed the most clear, and they had a great form. If I could find it again, I might have emailed it to Director Vengadaslam. I'll look in my emails.
So I have a question, clarification. Are we clear that this is, it says regarding employees, but we have a last statement about complaint against superintendent will be directly handled by the board. Are we saying this doesn't cover any complaints against the superintendent, or are we saying this also covers the superintendent? Because I remember having a discussion with Dr. Watts about all of us, the previous board, about having complaints directly handled by the board when it comes to the superintendent. So I'm still a little unclear on what this exactly covers after looking at WASDA's 4220. So if the superintendent is establishing procedures, it makes sense for establishing procedures regarding employees and programs. But then we're saying the final sentence, a complaint against the superintendent will be directly handled by the board.
And if you look at Tacoma's, and Auburn's and other, if you look at Tacoma's, a lot of the, so again, this is in procedure. So a lot of the districts, this last paragraph, you've got it on the screen. Oops, you just went away.
I'm sorry.
If the matter is still not resolved to the complainant's satisfaction, the citizen shall submit a written request to the complaint officer. We don't have a complaint officer that I'm aware of, or we would have to define that. We'll consult with the superintendent who will make a recommendation if the complaint is against a staff member. So basically, if a citizen doesn't like the procedure says if a citizen doesn't like the final decision of the superintendent, the board may uphold it or they may take different action, and whatever the board decides will be final. So, and then North Shore has they have a clearer policy around
go to the
this
table of
and
contents.
procedure. I know, go to my table of contents. It has links.
There we go.
But this only speaks to, I think they're all very similar.
Yeah.
It speaks to the superintendent handling it. Doesn't speak to
Mhm.
what you guys were talking about with regards to a complaint against the superintendent. None of these speak to that.
Yes.
They don't ever, none of them have language in it. So that's what, I think that's what
Right.
Maya's asking.
This
So
one
if
does,
this one,
except that, except that complaints against the superintendent shall be handled by the board directly. And
oh, so that sentence, okay.
yeah. And so that, I think, spells it out. And that's similar to what the suggested language we have, and I think they can label it 4220. So again, when you look at state law, the board is, it's local control, and, the board has one employee. So our policy before, and even the procedure for WASDA model policy doesn't account for that. And so I think it's important to account for that, since, that is our job by law to the board has local control. So, the proposed language, we were very purposeful and considered when we were talking about it.
So do you remember, Director Benja, why we didn't just include, it seems like, I guess, I'm sorry, sounding dense, but I'm trying to understand why that last sentence was separated out like that. I like the way North Shore has it. It makes sense.
I do.
Maybe it wasn't a run-on sentence. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I think if you scroll over, I think that was your language, which again, we discussed it and you typed it, and I was like, yeah, it looks good to me. So yes, we could directly copy North Shore's language.
Yeah, it just seems sort of out of place when you look at everything above, and it's not. It would be a run-on sentence.
I also like that they, the board has confidence in the staff and programs. I don't think we had that in our suggested language, and that's in the WASDA model policy too, which I am fond of, actually. That the board has confidence in its staff and programs. So, yeah. So,
yeah.
So sorry. So I was just going back to the WASDA model, because you were referencing the WASDA model ones. I was like,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I did see North Shore. I don't know, but I
think it's very close to the WASDA policy, but it adds that one. It adds that one section to that line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So I would say, this.
So what I'm hearing, I think what I hear is consensus around two things: adopting or writing a new draft that includes WASDA model policy language around, and of course I just closed it. Around the first.
The second sentence.
The first two sentences. I think the first two sentences are similar in North Shore's version and the version that Director Van Gosselaar and Bettinger looked at, as well as the WASDA model policy. And then from that point on, using the language in KSD's policy, with the exception of moving the sentence about complaints against the superintendent prior to the statement about the decisions of the board are fine. I also hear that the directors put quite a bit of time in looking at the procedure as well. And so staff will take note of that, and they'll look at WASDA's model procedures, because you referenced those two, to adopt new procedures to address this work.
Right.
Help me to understand, and I don't want to belabor this, but this is something I think that's important, is what's the difference between, let's say parent A had a complaint and they, against, I don't know, whatever, and they took it through the procedure and it came to the superintendent and they didn't like the result the superintendent gave them. So is that included in a complaint against the superintendent, his reading on that, or is that a complaint against something he personally did? I mean, what's the distinction?
I was going to speak to the spirit of the policy itself. So this actually doesn't show up in the 5,000 series regarding employees at all. It shows up in the 4,000 series, which is about community engagement. And so it speaks to a school district's community being able to provide input and feedback on operations of the district or pieces of the district. And so most of the procedures across the districts, I did look at what Director Bettinger sent, as well as WASDA's model, actually talk about handling whatever the problem is at the lowest, I don't want to say lowest level, at the simplest and most direct level of resolution, right? And so if I'm a parent and I have a problem with something that happened in my child's class, the procedure would then direct the parent to say, first, did you talk to the teacher? And if you were unable to proceed with some type of resolution that works, then did you talk to the principal? And kind of going through the process that way. And so it always kind of rolls back to the nature of the problem or the issue. And so I think, President Hamada, in your question, there's a subtle but distinct difference between the problem that I have in my child's classroom versus not liking the response or resolution provided by the principal that is then maybe supported by the superintendent. And so now I have issue with the superintendent, because at the heart of it, I'm still have an issue with my child's classroom.
Right.
Not with, I mean, yes, I disagree with the way the principal and the superintendent may have handled it, but the issue is not with the superintendent or the principal. It is still with my child's classroom. Versus in the second example, I think you provided, it's a direct complaint against an individual. So I think that's how it's expressed in procedure, and that's why it's a little bit different.
It's like an appeal process.
Yeah.
That's really the way that it works.
Yeah.
No, I understand that. I just think it could be a legal nightmare, actually.
Well, it would be a different complaint. So they would have to file a totally different complaint.
Because, I mean, it seems like the cases that we see coming through on emails that go on for 3 years or something, they get very complex, and it becomes an issue that never seems to get resolved. And then it becomes an issue that the superintendent didn't resolve it. And that's where I get kind of confused on this stuff. So President Hamada, I would say that you are correct in your interpretation of that. The policy is very simple for such a broad and inclusive topic. Because what it also doesn't address, even when, and quite a few of the policies say that the decision of the board is final, it doesn't get into the nuances of complaints against some employees are protected by a labor group, and they have certain rights to hearings and other legal pieces. It also doesn't discuss that sometimes the resolutions that are determined have legal implications. So possibly for an inclusive education student or some student in another protected class. So it will get, and it can get very complicated. And there's no way that in policy you could address every possible nuance of a complaint that would come to the board or the superintendent or even a principal. So that is where the board, you all as directors, have the benefit of Attorney Leonard. And we as staff have the support of Mr. Reynolds to help us guide us through those pieces to make sure that we're at least following the legal implications of some of these things, not just what is right to do.
If you look at Issaquah has Issaquah's procedure is very, very specific. It's like crazy specific about, this many days we'll respond. And it's their procedure, like their policy is very simple, but their procedure is so many pages. It just gets a little step 3 and all this stuff. So it's very interesting. I think, like I said, I'm going to try and find for you, Dr. Harmon, the form from Tacoma, because like it's a checkbox. It's like, did you talk to the teacher and what was the resolution? And you know what I mean? So the form handles a lot of what you were discussing, so it's like, I think it would cause someone to sit back and go, okay, did I go to the person closest to the situation, and what was my resolve, things like that. So, and I think Issaquah in this pages and pages of procedure tries to do kind of what Tacoma does with a very simple form. And like I said, I'll try and find it to share with you.
I'll look as well.
Yeah.
I just think that it's extremely important to educate our public a little bit more on how this is handled. And I don't know, maybe I'm looking for something that's never going to happen, but I'd like to see it more openly understood and taken care of. I mean, I just see things that have gone on, and maybe there's a reason. These things are complex, and things get convoluted, and people get ideas, and I hear one truth, and maybe that's their person's truth and another person. But I just like to find a system where we can really understand all this and who is actually responsible. And when you get to a point where this is the decision, and then that person does have the right to make that decision, whether you like it or not. And we have followed the law, and we have done this. So I want our community to feel encouraged by that. And I don't have all the answers, but I like the way their policy's written. I still think there's going to be a lot of wiggle room here. That's all. That's my concern.
Yeah, I do. I do think it's really important that we also, as board members, and I don't know where that is discussed, but we didn't get into that in the policies. But I feel like there are specific issues that are very sensitive or sensitive in nature that are not appropriate for board members to get involved and discuss. And so in that sense, it's really important that we do refer to the superintendent or designee for investigation. So I guess for me, I feel comfortable with this statement because it's saying that the concerns that come to our attention is getting referred to the superintendent. It's where it's not discussed with anyone, the superintendent or designee, but where we take action on behalf of the board or as individuals. I think that's where it becomes problematic. So that's one of the observations from the cases that have come forward that I see.
Yeah. We talked about that. I appreciate the discussion. And so while I do my very best to look at policy as we all should and do, look at it from an objective or through an objective lens, there are situations where I can certainly say we have tried our best to just thinking about some of the other language in previous policies about a compliance officer, for example, making sure that there's some objective intermediary to follow, as Director Bettinger mentioned, that checklist, because that's a standard operating procedure for most school districts to make sure if you have a concern, whatever that concern may be, we take it seriously. We also want to make sure that we're, for several reasons, allowing the problem to be solved at the most direct point of implementation, those individuals. So if it's a teacher issue, and I know I've heard that before. I have a complaint regarding a teacher. And my first question is, have you had that conversation with the teacher? And when you did, what was the end result, or the principal? The challenge for us is that until we get that practice, that procedural component in place, the question that is also on the other side of that is what we don't operationally define a complaint either, right? So what does that mean? In some cases, we've had complaints that for all intents and purposes, were either baseless or were not including all of the facts against me, against other leaders. And that then takes time. So I know it's part of the work. It's not perfect. But I use the example. Sometimes, you know, if my brakes go out in my Ford Focus, I might want to go to speak to the CEO of Ford and let that person know exactly what I'm feeling. But that's not the first step, right? So that would be my thought process. I know we did have 2 or 3 individuals. I think Tim Reynolds was working on that as well. I think Karen, we were working on that early on. We have not made progress, but thinking about what does that compliance officer or that intermediary need to look like. So just a thought to give you that perspective from an operational standpoint.
I really like that idea, Dr. Watts. I really do. I mean, so do I hear you saying that that's something that you're looking at right now to define through Mr. Reynolds and Miss Holly? Is that?
I'm saying we have had previous conversations over the past year and a half, if not past 2, but we've not taken any action, obviously. But I just wanted to add that to the depth and breadth of our conversation. This is not simple, and I certainly know it's a complex matter. But that's something I would certainly want to continue having that discussion and see how that would support procedural work or language in the procedure.
For this particular policy 4220, I would say look at what Tacoma's doing for their procedure and their form, because it's pretty.
I think it's
yeah.
when you say that. I think that's the actual document that they were looking at.
Yeah, the Tacoma procedure and form. I like the North Shore policy, and the Tacoma procedure and form is very, like I said, it's very clear, and it goes to what you're saying, that, you know, did you talk to the teacher, and what day did you talk to the teacher? And it's you know, the form takes you through the steps, and the procedure kind of mirrors the form, and the procedure is basically very similar to the WASDA model procedure. But again, the procedure, the form, that's not the purview of the board, just the policy is. And
right.
So, but
defining this and getting it more fine-tuned, I do think in the future, Dr. Watts, I could be totally naive, but I think the more defined we can become on that, the more we can educate our public on that, put it everywhere that this is what's happening. I can see that could be a help, and I could be totally wrong, but.
No, I appreciate that. I do.
And as board directors, you all have a different burden, but similar that we do as staff. There are certain things that legally we cannot discuss with the broader public, even though they may feel like they have a vested interest in knowing the resolution. Legally, sometimes that can't be discussed. If it's student related, it could be related to FERPA. Depending on the employee, there are certain employee rules around whether or not that conversation has to be held and had behind closed doors in an executive session, or can be held in an open public meeting. So sometimes our public who is interested in this and might be tangentially impacted by it may not have the legal right to know some of this as it's happening either, and that can be difficult. And that's where Attorney Leonard can help you all as board deal with that. And so what I hear, I just want to be clear, because we kind of walked away from it a little bit, that we are moving forward with this. And the next version of this that you see will have the language about the complaint against the superintendent, similar to North Shore's. And we will present to you all at the October 28th meetings, when all of this will come forward, policy. And we will take into consideration the board's interest in looking at some type of form or checklist that allows the public to walk through the steps of this, and aligning it with WASDA model procedure as well as procedure from other school districts that have done this well.
Mm-hmm.
So do I hear you saying, Dr. Harmon, that would be the second reading for adoption?
Yep. So the next time they go to regular meeting, it will be second reading and adoption. You'll get it in the same protocol that we provide documents the week before for the board to review. And then, of course, it's discussion and approval. So you're, as a board, can have discussion about it. And if you want to make additional changes, we can do that and it would come back. I'm just letting you know that the next version you see will apply these changes that we've discussed today.
I appreciate that. I'm starting to get a rhythm to this stuff a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.
We all are. That's what today was. That's why we did the schedule and all. That's we're going to find our rhythm and we're going to be able to move.
Yeah.
So that's 4312. We did opioid related. This is one that some might say is not a priority per se when it comes to policy work. But I will say that it is because we've talked about this a little bit and it's related to our current pandemic state. Sorry. We talked about Resolution 1321, which is right now still to date the only COVID-19 update that WASDA has done for the 2020-2021 school year so far. And it was about discontinuation of policy. And I believe at September 12th and even on the second meeting of the September month, second regular meeting, there was an informational kind of discussion agenda item, no action intended for the board. And the discussion at the time was not necessarily moving forward with the resolution, but instead taking a more general and long-lasting action and updating the related policies around emergencies and continuity of operations. Those would be the two related policies that could have similar language to the discontinuation of policies resolution. And so I just wanted to have a conversation with the board about that. I will say that this is one of those policy shifts that if we take this action, it will actually clean up some other things in our policy journey. So you notice we haven't been doing this very long this school year. And every time we've discussed a policy, it has typically involved renumbering a KSD only policy or possibly retiring a redundant policy. So this is kind of another one of those 2-for-1 opportunities for the board because we would clean up another policy as well. So our 6580 for Kent School District is called Key Control. And it is actually about who has key building access to our buildings, literally, physically, who has keys, and what is to be done when keys are lost, and all of those pieces. Not that that's not important, but it is not the WASDA model policy number 6580. So we do not have a continuity of operations policy in place for Kent School District. It's encouraged by WASDA, it's not essential. But if we were to go down this path to kind of shore up our operations during an emergency, we would adopt this and then we would need to renumber 6580 Key Control. Or we could retire it depending upon the recommendation of safety services or facilities. And so what I would like to engage the board in is taking a look at our emergencies policy, and we do have one that is very similar to WASDA's model emergency policy. So we do have this. And in that particular policy, although we do not I'm sorry, I need to stop sharing and share a new screen with you. You can't see what I can see. In the emergency policy, it walks through, and it's interesting that the emergency policy actually lives in the 3000 series. And I'm thinking that the spirit of this is because they're thinking about safety of children in the midst of an emergency. And it also deals with some RCWs around laws about the number of drills that we have to do to help our children practice for emergencies if they take place during a school day. So a lot of this one is about the operations of, I'd say, some more typical safety emergencies related to students. So shelter in place, lockdowns, evacuations, earthquake, we all do our great shakeout, bomb threats, Emergency school closure or evacuation. As we know, there are occasions during a school year where things happen to a single building that requires some closing or moving of students. And interestingly enough, a section on pandemic and epidemic, which was not updated. This has not been updated, I don't think, since 2017. So this is not something that WASDA updated for COVID. So the emergency policy does address some of the general procedures of the safety of students, the safety of staff, as it relates to emergencies. So this is one piece of that puzzle. What it does not do is really get into the operations of the school district. And I think that's where policy 6580 can help us and really address what the board was discussing. There are not major substantive changes to the 3000 series, to this policy, that are different from what we have on hand. Was like I said, the last update was 2017. And I think it updated some of the legal references to just make sure the links were still operating, that kind of thing. So the language is not different in the policy and action, and it is what we have on file as well. So if I were to bring this policy to you, it would likely be a second reading and adoption with just a change in the review date, meaning that the board looked at this and it's updated and current, because the last time WASDA did anything with it was 2017, and we're just taking the review and it's done. Our real work would be with 6580. But I'll give you a second if you want either to look on your own, or I can scroll back so you can review some of the emergency policy and give a detailed read if you prefer.
Yeah. So I looked at our 3432. I think it was last reviewed in 2005. And obviously it doesn't include a number of these things that WASDA has. And so, yeah, I actually like the combination of the two as you're speaking, because I'm scratching my head. I know that we talked about pandemic somewhere, but it certainly didn't get into any specificity in our 2005 reviewed. I believe it was 2005. Last one. So I'm good with this.
And so I think for us, the new work is going to be twofold. I'm going to pull up now. Hopefully you'll be able to see the continuity of operations.
Dr. Harmon, before we got, I don't know, Direct Vice President Daniels, did you have a comment?
No, not at all. Okay. I was just nodding in agreement.
Okay, I was going to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you. No worries. Dr. Harmon?
I'm sorry, Director Daniels.
Perfectly fine.
So this one is simple as well. And we all know that the hard work is in procedure. But the one thing that I can say from an operations perspective as a district that this past 7 to 8 months has taught us is about the importance of a plan. And so we've engaged our community as well in helping us develop a plan that is, yes, more COVID specific, but it actually, as staff, we've had conversations about how to generalize that and develop something more in line with what would be considered a continuity of operations plan. So what do we do when a single building is closed? What do we do when the entire district has to close campuses? And so as we've tried to develop plans and operations in response to COVID, we've also been very thoughtful about generalizing that to what if this were a different type of emergency? And I think that the continuity of operations plan starts to speak to that.
Yeah.
So I will give you a second to read this, and I can make it a little bit larger.
And, you know, when we talk about it, because even looking at the last policy, you know, in 2019, in February 2019, we essentially had like a weather emergency, a long-term snow weather emergency that, you know, the only thing I would add to the previous policy, and I don't want to go back to it, is just, you know, any kind of weather emergency that would be long-term for us.
I think that that's fair, and we can look at some weather-related language and propose that.
Yeah, I don't want to go back, but just throwing that out there.
I think the one piece here that it kind of is the gap in this is what do we do in instances where policy cannot be conducted due to an emergency, or more importantly, it will likely come down to procedure can't be conducted to actually implement and live the policy because of the emergency. And so what then is the contingency, or what is the response in that space, or the expectation of the board? And I think that that's something that could be included in the continuity of operations plan, because not to put words in any board members' mouths, but I believe the interpretation of the resolution was that it was too broad. And we also know that not having any flexibility, because I've given examples of how there are several times that we were out of compliance with policy just because we simply could not do the thing that it was asking. And so how do we find that space, and then how do we keep the board informed of that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, even, again, potentially language that just said the, board recognizes that in some emergencies, swift action needs to be taken. If that occurs, it will be, sent, it'll be approved at the next board meeting or whatever. I think there are ways, as long as the board knows that something had to happen, I think that fulfills our oversight role, our monitoring role. And again, it's not a new, depending on the way the pandemic goes or anything like that, it's not another new resolution we have to pass. It's like, no, we took thoughtful action to ensure continuity of operations and to ensure that everyone's safe, our physical buildings are safe, and then understanding that there could be a time where a procedure couldn't be followed, and that there would be notification to the board in that event, or,
So I think it might fall under, so I'm looking at the last two bullets where it says facilitate decision-making for plan execution and the subsequent conduct of operations. I think in there that could be shared, right? So for example, in your plan that you're sharing, it could say at this particular time, we're not able to adhere to this policy, such and such, and then go back to where it says achieve a timely and orderly recovery.
Right.
So, I mean, I think it could fall in there. I don't necessarily know that it would need to be called out separately, because I think that could be, as you're sharing with us the decision making for the plan execution. Well, it could mean at this point we have to push this policy aside, or we're not able to adhere to this policy. I think that could be in the plan execution. I don't know that it would need to be called out separately.
Yeah, and it might just be something that I'm assuming, Dr. Harmon, that there's a procedure that relates to this as well.
I muted myself because I was typing.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, just trying to take, because you all were giving kind of language examples, and I was just trying to capture some of that. Yes, it does. And then it also leaves space to kind of, the district will submit its plan here kind of thing. So I think that would be a component of this as well. And like I said, we're actually living this process right now, which is why I thought that updating these policies was timely. Because as we engage in the back to school task force and all of those pieces, this is becoming our plan.
Right.
Not just for COVID, it's actually, we're building a plan of how we would operate in these types of instances. So it's a great example, and I appreciate both of those suggestions on the language, and as well as calling out obvious policy or procedural conflicts as we go through this.
For the board's knowledge, this is another example, Director Bettinger, your statement earlier, while we are not required to, in any change that we make to the existing plan that was approved by board and then sent to OSPI for approval, we're not required, for obvious reasons, because of the many different nuances that may impact, not required to bring a new plan before the board, but obviously we're going to keep you informed about any changes or updates that would have taken place from our current state to next.
So we do have, I don't remember, but I think last board meeting we approved a policy that talks about emergency actions that needed to take place. And then I know Director Bettinger, you talked about cross-referencing those sort of policies. I think it would be really important because I can't remember now which policy it was, but we talked about KM fire, you know, that happened, and
Right.
there was no time for a board meeting to approve.
Right.
And,
Right.
so we have several of these that overlap, and I don't know if there is anything cross-referencing these, but that would be good. Good idea.
I will double check. Right now, these were the two when I looked at kind of emergencies, policy. These were the two that came up as cross references for each other. I'll look to see if there are any others related to this so that we can put that on the next update so they'll kind of go together. But this is, it's a 6,000, so 6580, 6,000 series, and that deals with operations of the school district, not just financial, but typically emergency situations have financial impact. I made some language, I made some notes about language that we can add to provide a KSD perspective and reflect the interest of the board in that. So I will draft that and bring that as a second reading to the board at the October meeting. And again, it may not be approved because there may be additional discussion, and that's okay, but that's where you'll see it next. I will say that right now, the procedure related to this may be a bit generic other than some WASDA model language, and then a link to our current back to school plan, knowing that we will use that as a basis to create a more global continuity of operations plan.
Right. Yeah. Because here we, we also have flooding. Like we have there's the Kent Valley, and there's potential for flooding and stuff. And I don't think I saw anything, you know what I mean? It's, there are some things specific to I really appreciate you looking at that resolution and looking at these policies and bringing this forward. So it's, again, I think a long-term solution sometimes that take into account other things could happen. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to do this and bring this to us.
And I will defer to Safety Services and Facilities about their recommendation for key control, because that's not something that exists as a WASDA model policy at all. Right. So we don't have a support reference for that. And then based on that, I will bring a recommendation to the board about either some suggested updates. And to prevent any confusion, I will wait until our November work session, since it'll be a kind of first reading of that. I don't want to put that on the agenda.
So fascinating.
So I don't want any confusion around that piece. But I will defer to them and reach out and find out what the suggested resolution will be around 6580. But I wanted to determine your interest in what we were going to do with this before I asked them to renumber or retire something.
Right.
So, okay. So that is great. We have 7 minutes. And while I'd like to believe that we can get through quite a bit in 7 minutes, what I would prefer that we do really quickly is talk about what's left and my plan for us to still cover those and stay on schedule for the month of October. So we have still, I believe, 4 policies that we haven't discussed as of yet. One is related to a WASDA policy alert update. That's policy 3205, sexual harassment of students prohibited. Loosely related to that is policy 5010, non-discrimination and affirmative action. Both of those, the only reason the 2 of those are linked at all is because there have been some federal updates to Title IX laws, and they both seem to reference Title IX and Title IX officers in their policy update. The other 2 are just relevant to continuing operations in Kent School District. So policy 1800, commitment to strategic planning. And so coming off of a strategic planning schedule and getting ready to embark upon the development of a new strategic plan, what better time to clarify the board's interest in the strategic planning process than to update the 2 policies that align with that. Interestingly enough, both of those live in the 100 series or 0 series policies. And so we can take a look at those as well. And then the last but not least is one that again, this is going to be our theme as we go through this work, will require some renumbering and adjustment. We have a policy 3245 in KSD that speaks to possession of weapons and firearms. And it is in the 3000 series specific to students. So not that it is not relevant that we keep our students safe, and we have a policy that is specific to students regarding weapons, but it is actually redundant to policy 4210, which speaks to regulation of dangerous weapons on school premises for anyone, adult or child, student, staff, or visitor. And so I would make the suggestion that we probably, and this was WASDA's recommendation when they reviewed our 4000 series, that we adopt the 4210 and probably retire 3245. I would second that, especially since WASDA actually does have a model policy for 3245, which is students and telecommunications. And while I do not, I'm not saying that people engage in that conversation coming up soon, but it would allow us to have space to align our policies with WASDA model policy and have the correct numbering. And so that's what we have left. And we have a wonderful opportunity to meet this deadline still with leveraging our October 14th work session. So we still have 1 hour without adding any additional meetings for the board to address these 4 policies, or at least 4 topics, and continue along our path of having them on the 28th agenda, or at least getting a few more of them on the 28th agenda. So what I'm proposing is that we won't finish this, but they will then become the agenda topics for our work session on the 14th.
The 4210, we did have a discussion to go back to our attorneys on that one. It was so complicated. We read it and we had to reread it. And so I don't know if it's going to go back or if it has been reviewed by Curtis. But
yeah, this when we called him that day, I think this was the one we asked him to look at. So I think it's just going to be circling back to him and double checking that he looked at it.
And I can do that. And if you want, in the meantime, we can table it until the November meeting, if that's fair, to make sure that he has time and there's ample time to discuss it in a 2-hour work session rather than trying to cram it in with some others in a 60-minute, definitely time constrained work session. And so that would leave the other 3, which are, I think, fairly meaty enough to cover in 60 minutes. And so if that's the preference of the board, that's fine. And we can work on 3245/4210 at our November work session.
Okay.
Yep. But that would allow us to pretty much cover the entire agenda for October still within the month. So any other questions or, and I've been trying to focus on policy updates per WASDA alert, policy updates that the board has provided feedback upon, especially those that are essential updates. I would ask that you all work with Dr. Watts if you have suggestions for other policies or other things come up. Sometimes as staff, I don't have the context for that or don't really know. So, but I'm open to making sure that those things also show up on the agenda. I've also communicated with staff where some of these live mostly in their area. So for example, connecting with HR around the 5000 series. So that they are aware and they have a kind of lookout too of anything that's coming or any laws that have changed that would necessitate us coming to you with and moving those up further. If there are no questions for now, I think we've reached a clean stopping place. We have, by my clock, probably about 90 seconds left. Nope, 60 seconds left because it just turned to 7:29 to wrap up the meeting.
Well, I think we've accomplished quite a bit tonight, and thank you for all your work here, Dr. Harmon. I think
did a good job.
Yeah, I think we've got quite a bit done tonight. So I'm pleased, and again, thank you for all your work on this.
Absolutely.
Does anybody else have any other comments before we conclude here? No. Okay. Well, if that is it, it is 7:29, and I'm closing and adjourning the meeting. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night,
Thank you,
everyone.
Have a good night. Be safe.
Thank you, Dr. Harmon.
Bye.
Night.